been so much in the news, and our friends here on the floor have been raising questions about responsible, reasonable gun control. We want gun control that does not violate the Second Amendment of the Constitution, the purpose of which is to allow citizens to protect themselves. It's not just for hunting, but to allow citizens to protect themselves. And the thing that I noticed, Mr. Speaker, in my decade as a judge, the criminals that came before me for crimes used with a gun, they did not, I can't remember any of them. I think I handled around 6,000 cases, felony cases, went through our court. I can't remember any where they went down to a gun store and bought a gun. They stole them. They bought them from other criminals. And with the 100 million guns that I understand have been purchased in recent years, it doesn't look like there will be any chance to remove guns from anyone except law-abiding citizens. But it's been interesting. You know, we inquired, my Republican friends, colleagues here, we inquired over and over, and still 7 years after President Obama took office, we know that shortly thereafter there was a scheme hatched within his administration to sell guns to criminals that would get to Mexico and fall in the hands of drug cartels. And they didn't adequately monitor. There were nothing put on the guns so they could be traced exactly where they were going. We know one of them was used to kill government agents. So whether it was intentional, reckless disregard for American government agent's life who was working for the president to have one of the president's subsidiaries or employees provide guns in such a way that they would end up killing one American agent and apparently hundreds of Mexicans. And we don't even know the full extent because we can't get answers from this administration. Eric Holder intentionally withheld evidence. He refused to provide information. I felt like he should have been impeached and thrown out of office. We never got answers about Fast and Furious. But we did see emails where within this administration, even after they got caught, that this administration had facilitated weapons being provided and sold to people who would take them to the drug cartels of Mexico. Even after they got caught, they were still wondering if it might be possible to use the fact that these guns were being used to create violence to justify attacks on Second Amendment and taking away Americans' gun rights. Apparently, November was a huge month for the sale of guns, and apparently Black Friday, the past week, has been a record for, not a record, but just a massive number of guns being sold. I believe I saw there were 185,000 requests for gun purchases Friday after Thanksgiving. Regardless of what the number was, if that's not completely accurate, it's staggering how many people are now in fear for themselves and their families because of the policies of this administration. Now, because of Fast and Furious and how there were people in the administration that were contemplating the sale of guns to drug cartels that this administration facilitated as a reason to have more gun control, it does make you question the motivation of some of the administration's policies. we know that especially the last 5 years of George W. Bush's presidency, his administration was vigorously prosecuting gun violations. But this administration has never prosecuted. In the 7 years, they've never prosecuted as vigorously as the Bush administration did in those times. And then we find out that not only were they not prosecuting as vigorously as they did in those 5 years, last 5 years of the Bush administration, but in recent years, they've been cutting back on the prosecution of gun violations. So we find out that in 2013, gun violation prosecutions by this administration diminished. And then we find out that in 2014, they diminished even further by this administration. And then we find out that in 2015, this administration set a record for the last 7 years of prosecuting fewer gun violation crimes than any administration. Well, this was the lowest this year, any of his last 7 years. So the administration, as they have increased the demand for more gun control to take guns away from law-abiding citizens, they have been decreasing the number of gun violations they've prosecuted. And in the wake of this administration's involvement in Fast and Furious and trying to use it to promote more gun control on law-abiding citizens, it makes you wonder, what is the reason this administration continues to prosecute fewer and fewer gun crimes? It's as if this administration, and I'm not saying, Mr. Parliamentarian, through the Speaker, I'm not saying a specific person or the President, I'm not violating the House rules, but I'm saying this administration in bulk, which doesn't violate the House rules, somehow has had this policy of prosecuting fewer and fewer gun crimes. At the same time, they're increasing rhetoric to have more gun control. It's as if, and I'm not alleging, I'm just saying it's as if they wanted gun violence to increase so that they could get more gun control, as it appears their motivation in using what happened with gun violence as a result of their 2,000 weapons they forced gun dealers to sell to people they shouldn't have. Well, when I first heard the proposal, gee, nobody who's on the no-fly list, can't even fly on a plane, should be able to go buy a gun. It seemed reasonable. I was talking to my friend Tom Price from Georgia back here earlier, Mr. Speaker. He said the same thing. It struck it, wow, that seems reasonable. Until you start considering how one gets on the no-fly list, who's been on the no-fly list, the massive abuses of individual constitutional rights by this administration, the abuses that of the IRS of law-abiding citizens that Richard Nixon could have only dreamed of abusing the way this administration has. But the trouble is, there's no due process for someone to be adjudicated to put on the no-fly list. There's no due process to get off the no-fly list. And in fact, one of the men I respect as much as anybody I know, he's a constituent, he's an Army veteran, he's a retired general, lives in East Texas. We've had to help him a number of times, once again, to get off the no-fly list. And unfortunately, we never can find out why he's ever put on the no-fly list in the first place. The only thing I know, he is a devout Christian. He is a supporter of mine. He would never knowingly violate the law of the United States. So I don't know. Is it because he's a supporter of mine? I mean, a year ago, I was trying to fly back from London, and an official there in the London airport with their security said, "Sir, I understand who you are. Very sorry, but your Homeland Security says you're somebody that has to be personally, physically searched along with everything that you have." Gee, maybe the way I cross-examined them in the judiciary hearing. Well, when you know that this administration has abused its power repeatedly, and you find out that actually the no-fly list is so obscure, it's like something from a Kafka novel. Never really enjoyed his novels. But the trial, it makes you think of, wow, you mean this obscure government entity can charge you with something, but you can't, just like in the trial, you can't find out what you're charged with. You can't find out why you're on the no-fly list. You can't find out if it's part of an enemy's list. You can't find out what's the best way to convince the government to get you off. Are there mistakes made? Well, gee, Mr. Speaker, could it be that a mistake was made when one of my constituent families from Lufkin was going to take their dream vacation to Disney World? They felt like the kids were old enough to enjoy it now. And when they tried to check their bags, they couldn't because of their 5 children. Their middle child was on the no-fly list. He was a potential terrorist. Now, I come from a family with 4 kids, and if I was going to pick one of my siblings, including me, to be a terrorist, I would say it's probably the young one. Well, this child was 5 years old. He was the middle child, not the youngest. And they pulled him aside thinking his name's on the no-fly list. He must be a terrorist. Well, thankfully, in Houston, they had some common sense and quickly figured out this is not a terrorist. It's not. Not so when they tried to leave Orlando to fly back home. He was pulled aside. The 5-year-old, he was separated from his parents. His parents were fit to be tied. They were threatened. They were not allowed to be with their child. They take him off to interrogate him. A 5-year-old child. But he's on the no-fly list. And they couldn't figure this out. They think he's a terrorist. They ask him his date of birth. He's freaking out. He's separated from his parents and his other siblings. He knows the month and day. He can't tell them the year. So now they think he's withholding information. They endured a lot of counseling and nightmares because of the abuses of this administration's policies. And yes, mistakes are made like that. And sometimes when people's name get put on the no-fly list, you don't know what it's for. Here's an article, and I sure don't read from these folks very often, but the Los Angeles Times says it seems simple enough if the federal government, based on intelligence or policing, puts a person on his watch list of suspected terrorists or decrees, he or she is too dangerous to be allowed on an airplane. Then surely it would be foolish. Let that person buy a firearm in the United States. Makes sense, doesn't it? That was the thrust of a proposed law by Senator Dianne Feinstein. Goes on down. One problem is that the people on the no-fly list, as well as the broader terror watch list from which it is drawn, have not been convicted of doing anything wrong. They are merely suspected of having terror connections. I thought it was outrageous that Senator Ted Kennedy was on the no-fly list. I don't know. Maybe Homeland Security knew something the rest of America didn't know, but it seems Senator Ted Stevens, the late senator's wife, Catherine Stevens, her name was on the no-fly list. She had those problems. So it could be that you're guilty of only having a name similar to somebody that was put on the list for who knows why. But that is not a good way to take people's guns away, to say, yes, we want to pass a law so that this administration, behind closed doors, with the lowest learned, put people's name on a list that can never buy a gun, can never fly on a plane. That is a scary proposition. And how about the 72 Department of Homeland Security employees that are on the no-fly list? And then we find out also, thanks to Senator Jeff Sessions, that we've had two refugees in this country who this year have been either charged or convicted of terrorist activities, and one worked around O'Hare Airport and another worked around here over, I believe as a cab driver working around Reagan Airport. How about we take care of the people that we know for sure are a threat to America? Anyway, the article from Washington Times says, according to technology website techdirt.com, 40% of those in the FBI's watch list, about 280,000 people, are considered to have no affiliation with recognized terrorist groups. All it takes is for the government to declare it has reasonable suspicion someone could be a terrorist. There's no hard evidence required. Standard is notoriously vague and elastic. So, article from Free Beacon about the 72 employees. A tip of the hat to Congressman Stephen Lynch for finding that information. This article from Neil Monroe, Breitbart, California shooting shows jihad risk from Muslim migrants' U.S.-born children. The San Bernardino shooter who killed 14 Americans is yet another name on the growing list of U.S.-born children of Muslim migrants who grew up to embrace violent jihad. Seems like somebody has talked about that before. Before Saeed Rizwan Farouk, the most notorious example was Anwar al-Awlaki. Born in New Mexico in 1971 to accomplished professional-class Yemeni parents, he subsequently embraced the violent commandments of Islam, complete with its many calls for attacks on Kafirs or non-Muslims. His career as a jihadi advisor, recruiter, cheerleader ended when he was killed by a U.S. missile strike in Yemen in September of 2011. Another example is Nadal Malik Hassan, the Virginia-born son of Arab migrants, who murdered 13 Americans in Fort Hood, Texas in 2009. That attack was downplayed by federal officials as workplace violence, even though Hassan had described himself as a soldier of Allah on his U.S. Army business cards. The problem is worse among Muslims because Muslim culture and religion is hostile to integration. Spencer says, quote, Islamic law announces itself as a superior model for society and government, so you've got no community-driven reason Muslims to integrate or adopt American values because their way is better. Now, that's what Spencer says, but I do know Muslims here in the United States that don't believe that they should adopt Sharia law. I've got Muslim friends in Afghanistan and all over North Africa and the Middle East. They don't want radical Islam. And in fact, in Egypt, so proud of the people of Egypt. They rose up and said, we don't want radical Islam. Of course, this president, this administration wants to punish them for throwing out the Muslim brother president. But this article, back to Neil Monroe's article, he says, in August 2015, the FBI arrested the U.S.-born son of a supposedly moderate imam as he began his journey to join ISIS in Syria. Mohammed Ada Dakkala was accompanied by his young university-educated American wife who was a convert to Islam. That's the quintessential example of the risks involved because the father is supposed to be moderate and we're supposed to think the son subscribes to a violent Islam completely different from the father, but there's no evidence of a rift between the father and son. In October 2014, 2 U.S.-born teenage girls were nabbed by the FBI as they began their journey to Syria. The left-wing Southern Poverty Law Center lists as at least 5 additional U.S.-born jihadis or would-be jihadis at its site, including James El-Shafei, who tried to detonate a bomb in 2004, Ahsanul Sadiqui, Tariq Mahana, Wali Muhadi. His family name comes from the Arab term for holy warrior, and Nazir Jason Abdo, who planned to attack Fort Hood in 2011. So I also would like to tip of the hat, Mr. Speaker, to Secretary Jay Johnson that went back out to the Al Dulles Area Muslim Society, ADAMS for short. I'm sure John Adams appreciates that very much. I don't know if the President's friend, Imam Majid, let's see. No, this article mentions him. One of the most meaningful discussions on his tour, talking about Jay Johnson, he called it, was in June with the Adams Center Imam, which began with a Boy Scout troop leading meeting participants' Pledge of Allegiance. That Imam, Muhammad Majid, is a past president of Islamic Society of North America, an organization linked to the Holy Land Foundation in its terror financing trial, and to the Muslim Brotherhood. And by the way, it was listed as a co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial for supporting terrorism. And once they got the convictions of the 5 main people being prosecuted, ISNA, CARE, some other folks tried to get their names withdrawn from the pleadings being specifically named as co-conspirators in support of terrorism. But the federal district judge and also the U.S. Federal Court of Appeals, Fifth Circuit, said, no, there's plenty of evidence to support that you are co-conspirators in supporting terrorism. I was told by a lawyer that the plan was, once they got those first 5 convictions, they would go after ISNA, Imam Majid, all these other people. But fortunately for Imam Majid and ISNA and CARE and all these groups, President Obama got elected, and Eric Holder immediately made clear that nobody was going to prosecute the rest of those named co-conspirators in supporting terrorism. Now, it's also in the news today that the headline from the Washington Times says, Huma Abedin taunts Donald Trump, I'm a proud Muslim, by Kelly Riddell. That's in the paper today. Huma Abedin, the longtime confidant to Democratic presidential frontrunner Hillary Clinton, took aim at Donald Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States in an email with the subject line, I'm a proud Muslim. Donald Trump's leading every national poll to be a Republican nominee for president. Earlier today, he released his latest policy proposal to ban all Muslims from entering our country, wrote Ms. Abedin, or Ms. Weiner, anyway. And in an email Monday evening to Ms. Clinton supporters, I'm a proud Muslim, but you don't have to share my faith, share my disgust. Trump wants to literally write racism into our law books. Islamophobia doesn't reflect our nation's values. Here's an article from 2012, July 27, by Andrew McCarthy, where it talks about Senator John McCain's claim that concerns about Huma Abedin are a smear based on a few unspecified, unsubstantiated associations. And actually, Michelle Bachmann and I, 3 others, signed letters. We just said, here are some things we know. Would you do an investigation to see the extent of Muslim Brotherhood influence in your department? The 5 different departments had 5 different specific letters, and there were not any vague allegations. We just said, we know these things are true. Would you investigate? Well, come to find out a lot, and this article says the letter averred that Abedin has 3 family members, her late father, mother, and her brother, connected to Muslim Brotherhood operatives or organizations, unquote. Turns out, however, that Abadan herself is directly connected to Abdullah Omar Nassif, a major Muslim Brotherhood figure, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, the Muslim Brotherhood has been named as a terrorist organization by both Egypt and the UAE. They've asked officials in both those countries, when I've been over there, have asked, why do you not recognize the Muslim Brotherhood has been at war with you since 1979? You keep helping them. You've got people advising the president. They're all Muslim brothers. Why do you keep doing that? I don't have an answer for them. But the article goes on. Turns out Abadan herself is directly connected to Abdullah Omar Nassif, a major Muslim Brotherhood figure involved in financing of al-Qaeda. Abadan worked for a number of years at the Institute for Muslim Minority Affairs as assistant editor of its journal. The IMMA was founded by Nassif, who remained active in it for decades, overlapping for several years with Abadan. Nassif was also Secretary General of the Muslim World League in Saudi Arabia, perhaps the most significant Muslim Brotherhood organization in the world. In that connection, he founded the Rabita Trust, which is formally designated as a foreign terrorist organization under American law due to its support of al-Qaeda. You ought to be able to stop right there, but he doesn't. He goes on. Further down, says, in this instance, however, before you start probing the extensive, disturbing Brotherhood ties of her family members, whom Abadan should have been ineligible for any significant government position based on her own personal, long-standing connection to Nassif's organization. Specifically, Ms. Abadan was affiliated with the Institute of Muslim Minority Affairs, where she was assistant editor of the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs. The journal was the IMMA's raison d'etre. Abadan as assistant editor from 1996 through 2008, from when she began working as an intern in the Clinton White House until shortly before she took her current position as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton's Deputy Chief of Staff. Again, this article was written in 2012. IMMA was founded in the late 1970s by Abdullah Omar Nassif, who was then vice president of prestigious King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. It goes on to talk about all the ties, his ties with Civilization Jihad, the Muslim World League, over which he presided, and with whom Abadan had this relationship in this publication for all those years that she worked with Hillary Clinton. They managed the Civilization Jihad, the Brotherhood's commitment to destroy the West from within and to conquer it by Sharia proselytism, or dawah, as Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, the Brotherhood's top Sharia jurist, puts it. Nevertheless, the Muslim World League has a long history of deep involvement in violent jihad as well. So then we find out, actually, this article today, spinning up as we speak, email shows Pentagon was ready to roll as Benghazi attack occurred. We still don't know who stopped the military. The email shows they were ready to go and to help our people at Benghazi. Somebody stopped them. Was that advice Huma Abadan gave Secretary Clinton? We don't know. Was this advice that reached the president? We don't know. We don't know whether he went to bed and said, you take care of it. If he went next door, like was reported about when Osama bin Laden was taken out, he went in the next room and didn't watch and played cards. We don't know what they were doing. This report from Robert Windren, the ISIS Trail of Death, it goes on to point out what ISIS is doing. We know there's 1,000 cases being investigated right here. And look, I'm not advocating we get rid of all Muslims in the United States. We got Muslim friends here in the House. But we do need to take a look to see whether people want to replace our U.S. Constitution with Sharia law. We need to take a harder look at who we allow to come in this country and have a child who they will take back to Yemen or wherever to teach their child to hate America. And people can make fun of me still, but Americans that we know have died because we've allowed this to happen, and they come back as American citizens whenever they want, and it gets so bad that even President Obama has to take out an American citizen who was born here to parents that trained him to hate America after they went back to Yemen. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Texas have